Is it slow?
Good afternoon, Hector.
By the way, I'm sorry you're a Gator fan.
Welcome, gentlemen. Today's episode of Conversations for Humanity will be a special episode with my great friend and co-host Brian Sumner and my great friend Hector Alvarez, which is the founder and president of Alvarez and Associates LLC. How are you doing today, Hector?
I'm doing good. How you guys doing?
Doing
I am
very
doing
well.
fantastic.
Very good.
So, Hector, the reason why I got you on the call today is you sent that great article about the eBay fiasco and everything like that. And
Yep.
since you got a lot of expertise in the criminal justice system and also workplace violence prevention and all that kind of thing, I would really like to get your deep down dive into what eBay did and how you would actually handle it from your perspective. So I'd just like to get your point of view, and Brian, you can chime in when you can, because Brian is just fundamentally a great guy who really analyzes things from many different perspectives too. So just tell us a little about how long you've been in Alvarez and Associates, how that got started, and then give us your take on eBay.
Sure. So, real quickly, my background is kind of a combination of about 30 years between law enforcement, security, mainly corporate security. And then what I realized is I always ended up at companies that were fairly big. I started at Dell Computers when they had like 2,000 employees. Pacific Bell Video when it was consolidating, and then I worked for National Critical Infrastructure that oversaw the power grid for the state of California. What that gave me was access to all the gates, guards, and guns a security person could want. It wasn't from a lack of resources, but I started to notice pretty quickly that we were still having problems with people doing bad things. And it wasn't, again, for a lack of money. And so I really started to focus my attention professionally on trying to understand why people would want to hurt other people or do bad things. And that became really my life's mission and work. And so about 8 or 9 years ago, my wife and I decided to leave corporate and start our own thing, Alvarez Associates. And all we do is workplace violence prevention, either trying to look at the site security, training, understand what you do and how you can do it safer. And then a growing portion of what we do is called behavioral threat assessment and management, which is we try to figure out, is a threat serious? And if it's serious, is it credible? And those two things are really important because, somebody could walk into your place or make a phone call, as an example, and say, I'm going to blow that place up and hang up. Well, that's a serious threat. But how credible is it? Whereas you may get a creepy look from a coworker, from somebody who let go, who just glances across at you and says something like, you know what, buddy? Fine. Now, it's not necessarily a serious stated threat, but if you look at it in a full context of all the situation, it could turn out to be much more credible than the other one. So I did a lot of work and have continued to do work to try to understand relationships between people. Because my frustration has been, out of probably a little over 4,000 cases I've been involved in or investigated, it's very rare that there's not crystal clear warning signs. I guarantee when we go back and look at this eBay thing, we're going to find out that there were warning signs that something was going afoul. And so I started to try to understand that, what to look for and how to help people find it. Bachelor's degree in criminal justice and then a master's degree in forensic psychology, certified threat manager through ATAP, which is the organization that certifies threat managers. Guys, this is what I do. So that's kind of how I landed into this space.
And I take it you was in law enforcement before that. How many years? You told me, I forget.
See, that's interesting. I've always been in law enforcement, but never full time. I've been a reserve officer in my local town for about 16 years now. So in parallel to working in corporate security, I'd always liked the idea of being a cop. So I put myself through police academy and would work, every weekend or as they needed me for the last, 15, 16 years.
Nice. So give us your take of how you would address the eBay situation and everything. And like you just said, we definitely will find out at a later date what was probably the root cause of this all at this eBay fiasco. Because when I looked at it, I was just like, oh my God, who in the world would do that? I mean, and literally there was to a point that, if I remember correctly, they were literally stalking these people at their own home.
Oh
and
yeah,
that's bad enough.
they are alleged to have mailed animal parts to them. I mean, this campaign, it's an aggressive campaign, really took root and then ran. So the allegations are at this point that 6 people in a senior position, security position, mind you, of eBay, started targeting this group, this couple that didn't have that big a platform, but for some reason that platform that this couple had got under the skin of these executives, and they decided, you know what, we're gonna make them pay, and they started a legitimate cyber stalking campaign. There's a lot we don't understand about this. What is more common is a person stalking another person, and there's a whole range of inappropriate pursuit, from failed relationships, and that's not uncommon. There's a type of stalking that involves people who don't know each other. They've never had any engagement. You see it a lot with people who are in the public eye, and they're talking, interacting with folks online, and they believe in their mind that there's a relationship. You know, we've worked several cases where the individual who is being stalked is telling us that the other person would take a piece of clothing that they're wearing and then convince themselves that that person is wearing it for them. Another type of stalking.
Mm-hmm.
This group stalking, this campaign, is something that's very unusual. And it's almost like, and I think one of the reasons why a couple of us were talking about the other day, that it took off and it rose to the heights that it did, was because I think they were feeding off each other. And it was, rather than just one person trying to hide, it was endorsed. It was almost expected. And so the allegations end up proving to be true. This is really going to be an interesting case of somebody wanting to do something bad to somebody else.
Remember, there was a pig's mask, cockroaches, rats, spiders, and of course they even did some, I guess, stalking to their own home to a certain degree, and everything like that. Now, from your world of experience in the threat assessment, workplace environment, what would you say, from just on the outside looking in, what would you think what was going on, even though we don't know all the details, but just from a premise sake, where do you think that they were coming from right from the very get-go when all this started? What was their really mindset of what you have known for so long and what you have done? What would that be for you?
So in this particular case, I think it was a difference of ideology that bothered each person. I mean, the reality is, in fact, when I shared this article, it was before all the racial strife had started in our country. It was always there. There's this division in our country that's widening. And I think it's widening because we have an inability across both sides to tolerate difference of opinions, different views. And it's really taken root and it's starting to grow. And so we're seeing that in a lot of other things. I think there was an undercurrent of disagreement in views. I think it was endorsed by this team atmosphere that almost celebrated additional action. See, because normally what we'd say, if you see inappropriate behavior, go to your boss, go to HR, go to security. But in this case, the team was complicit. They were working together. That's unusual. That's unusual.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brian, let me get your thoughts on what Hector's been saying here, and want to get your 2 cents into as well. What's your take on this as well?
Well, I agree with Hector that obviously what took place was either condoned, supported, enhanced, whatever terminology you want to call it, because it is a rare occurrence, I believe, in what you said, that you would have executive level people at a pretty well-known company blatantly do something like this. I mean, this, kind of reads straight out of a movie script, so to speak. and regardless of the profile of the couple that were targeted, I mean, at some level, it's it's domestic terroristic threats in a sense. I mean, if you look at terrorism, it's basically to terrorize and to put fear into someone. Um, Sadly, this rose to it, and you can go down any rabbit hole you want in terms of figuring out why somebody did something like this, and it could be as you says, as Hector points out, you're going to find out that there is some kind of rationale behind it. And the hardest part of it, I think, for people on the outside is to understand that the people doing it did have a rationale. See, we look at people's behaviors as kind of random, but they're not random to the people who do them. They might not be in agreement with how you would handle a certain situation, but to them, that's how it showed up. And whether it was celebrated and condoned and further enhanced from the group mentality, perhaps, I don't know. But when you look at a company executive to simply just say we don't like what someone else is saying, and it rises to that level is concerning. And Hector, as you mentioned, it could be something that is deeply rooted and has been this way for quite a while. But if you go through history of humankind, I mean, something like this isn't unheard of in terms of not listening to other people and wanting your opinion or our opinion to be the dominant one. I mean, look at no further than the news media today. I mean, that's ultimately what it's about. Um, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I think it's been exacerbated because of what you've seen in Minnesota and other places around the country. Um, but Hector, correct me if I'm wrong. If you go through most workplace violence cases, um, this type of situation isn't unheard of. I mean, whether it be San Bernardino or a school shooting, the people who have the aggressive actions, they all look at themselves as some semblance of kind of a victim in some way. Like they've been wronged somewhere along the line, whether it be real or
Yeah.
perceived.
No, and
Um,
that's a big part of it. Part of it is they feel like they're a victim, but here's the reality: there's a lot of people who feel like they're victimized, who then don't go on and take action.
yes.
There's a lot of people who hate, who then don't get angry enough to take action, and it's that conversion from hate to anger, and that's where we get really confused sometimes. Of
Yeah.
chasing down hate groups, it's kind of a lost cause, if you will, from a prevention standpoint. Because what you need to look for and really try to identify is somebody who's converting that hate, that anger, that passion into anger, which could lead to action. What we see a lot of times, because you're right, the underlying theme is they feel victimized. The conversion, where you start getting worried about it from a violence perspective,
Mm-hmm.
is when they want to make it right.
Hmm.
When they want to solve the problem, and so we're constantly
Their version of right.
their version of the problem. And I worked a case one time where it was a serious threat. He had threatened to hurt some people, all because his cubicle was moved. And they called me in. I was working, and I was trying to understand why he was so upset. Here's the reality: what he said was, and in his mind, this is what he believed. Over a series of years, they had moved his cubicle. They moved his location in the building. The last move got him by a window, so you could see outside. In his mind, what they were doing was physically moving him closer to the door to get rid of him. His grievance made no sense to everybody else, but it was real to him.
Yes.
He had a chart with dates and times they had moved him, who was involved. His grievance was real to him, and that's where it gets confusing for other people, because it's so easy to dismiss that it's just nonsensical. That doesn't even make sense. Well, it made a lot of sense to him.
Yes. Yes.
And so
I have a similar experience in the workplace of being pushed out. I was given the title of director of special projects, which is one step on the way out of of what we were, but obviously, different outcome. But so speaking to that reality for him or her or whomever has this kind of perception. What are some of the things that you look for outside of, taking every threat seriously and, initially? I mean, what can you do in the workplace? Because not every manager or executive is going to give it the time of day. They're going to be like, well, I paid you to do this job, do the job. I just moved you. It's no big deal. How do you recognize that it is a big deal?
Here's what's really interesting, and we're starting to better understand this. It's not the need to recognize that something is going on. I guarantee people around this team are going to realize that a team loading up and traveling across country to surveil a couple that wrote a newsletter is weird. What I think is really important is once you recognize it, because it's going to be different than the way the person interacted with you. Their behavior is going to be off centerboard from what they normally were. Intuition is pretty powerful. So it's most people I talk to, 99.9%, knew the actor was going to do something. The majority of them never said anything because they were scared or confused or didn't think they would be supported. So there is this concept that's starting to gain more attention called psychological safety. And it's really just the ability to create an environment that people feel comfortable coming forward. That what you're sharing is going to be listened to, that you're going to be believed. There's a whole bunch of warning signs that you can go through. But they're just that. There's warning signs. It's the next piece. What do you do with that warning sign?
Yes.
It's
interesting it's interesting you mention an environment, because my background in coaching, teaching, and otherwise, the environment is critical for sustained learning, for sustained development. And that's something that I think people can learn how to generate for themselves and for others. But it starts with a certain kind of way of being in front of people, I think. So maybe the workplace in general needs to shift, or at least the way people are in the workplace perhaps need to shift. It's interesting because it reminds me of the if you see something, say something, the adage that the TSA has, that they support it there. And I wonder statistically how many people actually say something in an airport when they see something versus what they might do in a workplace, like you said, of coming forward to actually saying something.
Yeah, there's a concept called bystander apathy, and we see in a lot of cases. And it's, you see something going on that's bad. Is it bad enough, or is it going to affect you personally enough that you're going to risk your safety, emotional or physical, to intervene? And that takes a lot for people to overcome. So there's dynamics that we understand of how people interact with each other. The dynamics right now going on in the world, I think, are going to complicate it. Yes. I'm concerned, given how torn we are as a nation, that translates down to families, to work groups, and we're seeing this really take off. So making it so that your organization is flat enough, is horizontal enough, that somebody is comfortable coming to you and say, hey, coach, hey, what about this? And you pause and listen. No, we're going to go this way, but that's a really good suggestion. Maybe next time. At least that person will feel comfortable coming forward.
Yes.
The same thing is true about workplace issues. The absolute thing is absolutely true about workplace issues. So it's not just the violence perspective. It's any type of inappropriate behavior, harassment, or discrimination. It's across the board. They have to feel comfortable coming forward.
And even if it isn't harassment, I think it could even be innovation or creativity or any dynamic of here's my idea and it not even gets listened to. That I think that could start a cycle of the top-down mentality, so to speak. Yeah.
And so taking that dynamic, I think that's what enabled these 6 people at eBay to run with it. I mean, where do you even find a pig's face? So imagine that discussion of, hey, where we're going to buy it, preserve it, and send it. Yeah. Imagine the discussion between grown adults who have lives and things to lose of let's go surveil this couple.
Yes.
And so a lot of stuff has to be pushed to the side to enable that behavior. Who knows where it would have ended? That's the real problem.
Where did they travel from? I forget offhand.
So they were based in Santa Clara, and I believe the couple was back on the East Coast.
Okay. I mean, because that's certainly a significant undertaking. I mean, we have 1,000 thoughts a day of anger and, oh, I want to, wring my kid's neck for doing something, but you never act on it or do on it, let alone drive or fly across the country to find, a funeral wreath or something else that they want to provide to someone. It is interesting.
No, because we have this balance, especially, when you're on a cause and you want to do something, you're constantly weighing out, is it worth it?
Yeah.
I mean, we go through our days justifying everything that we do.
Yep.
Am I going to get up and go to work today? I guess I'd better. If I don't, I'm not going to get paid. I'm going to lose the house. Kids aren't going to get what they want to. I mean, there's consequences for our actions. When somebody wants to take an act of violence against somebody else, first they have to justify that violence is what they want or need.
Mm-hmm.
Then they have to justify taking that action. And there's this constant discussion, internal battle of justifying it. At some point in their mind, it makes sense. They don't get there quickly. It's a process.
Yeah, because it reminds me a bit of the school shooting that took place many years ago at Virginia Tech. And I remember seeing some people talk about it, and I forget who and where I had read and saw it, but at some level, they kind of equated it to the person who decided to do that. They had decided or made up their mind that their life sucked. And it was no longer valuable in the sense that we would value it. So it justified it that my life sucks, so everyone else's life should suck. So they end up doing whatever it is that they feel justified in doing, which is kind of a really weird place to be for most people. I mean, I don't know if people have ever experienced or had people that they know that chose to take their life either through drugs or otherwise. And at some level, you really wonder, what does it take to take your own life or someone else's for that matter? Because that's a really deep, deep, dark place. I think you would really have to get to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, there's a police officer that I believe works the bridge in San Francisco, and he has, say, I think more than 100 people. That was just his role, what he does there. And one of the persons that he interacted with said something to him later that he was just hoping as he walked out to the bridge that somebody would say hi to him, that somebody would acknowledge that he existed. And in this person's mind, that would have been enough to stop him from attempting suicide. And that never happened until he interacted with this police officer. We hear that a lot. They're lonely.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then they perceive that they have no options. So just compassion to each other is huge. But here's the big problem. We're heading down this path where we're even less connected. Right? I mean, face-to-face meetings aren't happening at the same level. The human interaction to tell that your partner, your coworker, your friend, that their personality has changed, that their demeanor has changed, has shifted. So we, not to sound, all doomsday-ish, but we're kind of heading down this little dark path where we're going to have to be very aware of how we're interacting with each other and how we're not interacting with each other. Because I think that's what happens. They're sitting there and they're deciding, I'm going to do something.
Do you think words have an impact? Because we hear this phrase bandied about 100 times a day of social distancing. And I think it kind of misrepresents what it is that we're actually doing. We're physically distancing ourselves, but the social distance, I think, speaks to exactly what you're saying of the disconnectedness that people feel socially. Would that have an impact, you think?
I think it does have an impact. As the discussion of diversity, inclusion, and belonging continues, and right now there's a focus on the African American community because it's an appropriate focus given what's happened and where we're at, and every day we're finding a new issue. But as we get past this and we start trying to come back together, for years, decades, we spent a lot of time talking about our differences.
Yes.
At some point, we're going to have to start talking about what we share in common. If you go back just to the basic hierarchy of needs, there's human beings, they need a couple of very basic things. And once you get, food, shelter taken care of, affirmation, belonging to a group is really, really significant. We need that.
Yes.
And so to answer your question in a very long-winded way, I'm very concerned about this social distancing becoming emotional distancing.
Yes.
And we're going to have to find a path back to working towards a common goal. And we're pretty fractured right now in that. We're doing a good job of talking right over each other. And I think that's going to take some time to get back. It's going to take some calm voices, but I think it's going to take a couple bumps in the road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting time. Certainly. Chris, anything you'd like to?
Yeah, I'm just taking it all in, gentlemen, and you guys are just throwing some great home runs for us to really be more proactive versus reactive to what has been going on in this current state that we're in, because we're in, of course, COVID-19, all this racial division, all that. It's everything's being thrown at everybody at once. But I look back to my years of working, and I've been working since I was 16 years old, and I've seen it from the progression standpoint, Brian and Hector, to where people in positions of leadership or just in that very same thing, a position, not by permission. And if we have leaders that are leading by permissional leadership, we're going to have people who are wanting to be compassionate, able to truly listen to one another, truly give people space and reality of what their reality truly is and everything like that. Because we don't, it's like that, what you said about that guy being moved all the way out to the corner office, thinking he was going right out the door, and he actually tracked it and everything. And next thing you know, that was his reality. But we didn't ask him, why did you perceive it that way? And if we're going to become so disconnected in the way we're treating people at work and at home and social distancing and all that kind of stuff, we're not doing ourselves any favors, because we're not really truly connecting, because we've been telling ourselves we're all in this together because of the COVID-19 crisis. But are we really truly in it together? Because if we truly are, we should be at a better time in our place in human history, and we don't see that. And I'm so adamant about bringing humanity together, bringing humanity into business and beyond, because our very humanity calls for us to do the very things that are not only right, but do what is not easy. Because if we go the easy way out, we could have missed that guy on the road who was, let's say, on the Golden Gate Bridge, and all we could have just done is stop and say, hey, how are you doing? Is there anything I can do for you? Our very humanity dictates that, but we are so self-centered by design. And I was selfish for many years myself. My parents said I was the most self-centered, selfish guy, that I would never amount to anything in life. And they still feel that way today. They don't even believe that what the organization that I'm building is going to be a success, because of the way I've really flipped the switch and said, I can't do this no longer. But I believe, gentlemen, if we can have those people who are not in positions of leadership, but leading by permission, then that's when we're going to really lead with our humanity and everything like that. So I want to hear from both of you, and I'll start with you, Hector. What would you do to lead with your humanity, especially in the way you do it from your point of view and your skill set of workplace violence and prevention?
Yeah, so to kind of build on what you're saying, there is this storm that we're all dealing with, and we're all in the same storm together. But here's the difference, and we have to acknowledge this. Okay? Each of our boats is dramatically different. So our experience in this storm is uniquely different. And so for us to say we're all in this together, we're not. My boat is very different than everybody else's boat. And, some folks' boat may need attention. Some folks may comfortably ride this out like it's nothing. We have to acknowledge those differences so that we can adjust as we move forward. The other thing, the See Something, Say Something campaign is a great campaign. It misses one step. It misses that intervention. It misses that action. It's the same reason why a lot of bullying programs failed in school, because they taught us what to look for. They taught us how to identify the behaviors that were bullying type behavior. It didn't really focus on how to intervene. Didn't really focus on how to get the other kids to stand up and say, that's not right. Don't do that. So my call to action is the ability to say, not here, not at my workplace, not at your workplace. We're not going to tolerate inappropriate behavior here. And once you can get to the point that you can set boundaries, with the expectation that people respect them, you can start converting that world around you. We simply cannot tolerate unacceptable behavior. That's the thing. It's not enough to know what it is. We have to move to the point of not accepting it any longer.
Hector, do you
Brian, your
think part of,
thoughts?
I was just going to ask Hector a question in terms of the lack of the action in terms of bullying and so forth, where the students feel safe to do that. Do you think those programs were designed so that the administrators or teachers would be the ones to then intervene? It was their job, so to speak, not the students?
It was a combination. I think sometimes we're really good about taking an academic, scientific approach to understanding problems and then presenting the information. And it doesn't always have the benefit of having a practitioner. The teacher's the practitioner. He or she is in the classroom.
Right.
They've seen what's occurred. They need to take the information and apply it. I think a lot of times the curriculums were meant to come through staff to students. Now, there's been a lot of growth in that area. And now they're bringing people in to work that middle area. And what they're starting to recognize, we got to get the message to the kids. We got to get the message that it's okay to stand up and say, look, that's not right. And then give them a series of options. Years ago, there was President Reagan's wife came with the campaign, Just Say No. And it sounded catchy, but it didn't give a kid who's in the bedroom with peer pressure the tools to be able to get out of that situation. And so we've built from that and have provided several options. So I think it's the ability to provide that person in that situation a range of options that works for that environment, for their situation.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting, Chris, because we see what's going on in workplace and in otherwise. And I think one of the first things I had talked to you about was that we're already connected. And I have different experience from a lot of other people in terms of teaching and coaching and business and so forth. And there was a person that I've done a lot of work with, and he was doing a workshop in Japan. And obviously, cultural differences, language differences are exorbitant in comparison to state by state in this country. And one of the things that he used to do before his programs and the coaching programs that they ran was that he would go early and start and talk to the individuals who showed up early so he could get a sense of who they are and know them and realize. And he was there one day, and it struck him that he's already connected with the people who were there. He doesn't have to do anything to be connected. He's already connected to them at a fundamental human level. And when I got shared this information in terms of the story, it struck me as, wow, it's kind of interesting because, I was in academics for a long time, and other people who give presentations and so forth for a living and talk and whatnot. You often hear people say that they have to put on their kind of presentation suit, so to speak, and get all pumped up for a talk to prepare. And, I need to know my audience and so forth, almost implying that they're already disconnected and they have to do something to connect, as opposed to coming in being connected. And I think, Hector, what you're talking about is that so much of what we hear in the news and the media and the way we're taught throughout our life is that we have to do something in order to be a certain way. And I think maybe it doesn't quite work that way. Maybe it works that if we are a certain way, we're being a certain way, we can do it from that place and then have everything else that we're looking at. So, I kind of look at things in a unique way that maybe we are connected, and the rhetoric that we hear is one side of it, but it might not be the only side. I look at the media in large part of 24 hours a day propaganda to serve their purpose for whatever their purpose may be. But what if the workplace wasn't seen as violent? What if our bosses were seen as caring, compassionate, listening, and so to speak? And I think listening has a real component to this of what you're talking about, Hector, that we don't really listen to people.
I have organizations all the time that have me come in to do training, and I'll do an interview, some intake. What's the problem? What are we going to learn? And we'll get to the point of who's going to be trained, and very often it's they just want to train the staff. And I'm like, okay, so when is the session for the managers? Are the managers going to participate? Do you want to do a different program? And very often I get the suggestion that no, we just need to get the staff taken care of. And that does not work.
Yeah.
The entire organization needs to understand and have that same concept. But sometimes people see the approach as it being a band-aid that we can just throw out there and it's going to make it better. It's got to be a cultural shift, and changing the culture of anything takes a lot of work. I had a class I was teaching, a workplace violence class. We were teaching in the lobby of a physical therapy clinic. That's the type of business. And the receptionist, the front counter person, was sitting at her desk during the class. When we got to the point in the discussion about setting boundaries, she said, "Hey, Hector, I had an experience in the last couple of months. I wanted to share." She said she was checking in a brand new patient. Now, she'd seen him around. She had never personally interacted with him. So she's checking his chart to make sure that she has it right. So she's looking down, writing. And at some point, this man that she didn't really know, without asking permission or saying anything, reached across the counter and started stroking her hair. She was shocked, right?
Yeah.
In fact, she was so shocked that it was happening that she told me she just completely froze. And it wasn't that she was scared. It just really caught her off guard that the dude was touching her hair. In addition to that, at that particular clinic, they saw a lot of older men, for treatment over a period of time, and they had developed a way of interacting with these clients that was very touchy-feely. There was a lot of honeys, there was a lot of hugs, there was a lot of pats and sweethearts, and that became the culture. And so when this man touched her, it really confused her. Like, wait a minute, is this part of what we're supposed to do? It shocked her because it happened. She was more frustrated by the fact that she didn't react. Here's the problem. The more that we allow unacceptable behavior, the more that we allow the culture to deteriorate to a level that none of us want, well, then how do you really know that something's wrong? Yeah. So one of the problems with the See Something, Say Something campaign is if we start with a very low baseline, then what are you looking for? If we accept and allow and tolerate a whole bunch of unacceptable behavior, what really stands out? And so first we have to get the basic ground rules established so that we're all playing by the same rules, and then make it comfortable for somebody to come forward. All her coworkers, when she shared the story, were shocked. Like, why didn't you come forward? Why didn't you say anything? And she's like, well, because I thought we're supposed to hug and, tolerate sweetheart and honey. That workplace converted because they had an honest conversation in front of everybody.
Yes.
It could have been me or anybody. All I did was just facilitate the process. They got there on their own.
Yes.
And now they're dramatically different. But it's that same thing. So whether it's in the classroom or the workplace, it's got to be a culture. It's got to be an environment that shifts.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch companies attempt to implement change, because as you point out, change tends to be something that the employees go through, as opposed to the management. It's something that they have to do, and we being the management, absolve ourselves from it. It's not something, and I saw that in academics, you see that in business, that it's not our problem. It's our job to manage you, and you're not doing it right. Yet, what's really precipitating the behavior in terms of that the entire organization has to really be shifted.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also have seen and had conversations with people and I think we spoke about this, Chris, a little while ago, in terms of the workplace. When people ask others about their job, what do? They tend to describe it in terms of the tasks or the performance or what they do. I'm a lawyer, an accountant, the menial tasks that they do each day. And how we describe our jobs has an impact on how we view our jobs. So if my job becomes mundane or routine or boring, or I had a bad day at work because something didn't go as I planned in terms of a closing of some sort, we make this correlation that my job sucks. And since my identity is my job to some extent, by definition, I suck. And we devalue ourselves in that way. But it's all rooted in how we anticipate and interpret what our job is or isn't. Um, People used to ask me when I was an academic, "Oh, you're a professor." I say, "Well, no, I work as a professor. That doesn't make me a professor." I mean, there's a distinction between who I am and what I do, but we don't typically separate those two very often
It is
with our
interesting how
identities.
unbelievably basic and simple we are. We complicate it, but we're so unbelievably simple.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. And that's why, gentlemen, that I have started this organization as I have, because we have to get back to our simple humanity. And if we don't get back to who we are, it's just like, you probably have already know this, but there's one company that I know of that when I read the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership from John C. Maxwell, that Synovus Financial has it in their mission statement. It's the golden rule. Where is the golden rule in business today? Why are we allowing ourselves to let these very things take place if we're not going to adhere by the own golden rule that we were taught as kids? We know what's right and wrong. We consciously know that, but we're making another conscious choice, gentlemen, and I want to get your take on it, is we're not going down the path of what we were taught as kids because they want to either take the easy way out, they want to justify their standing in the organization because of what, like that one gentleman who was going to be said, quote, out the door because he was being moved so many different places in his time there, that he's already thinking, I'm already out the door, so I don't care if I'm going to stay here another day or not, but this is what I'm going to justify the way I'm going to interact with these people because they're not treating me as a human being. And I think in fact, I don't think, I actually know, because I think this come firsthand. The more we actually are proactive and truly engaging with people on that human connective level, to let people know we're already connected, as like Brian said, we don't have to fight ourselves to such a degree that we get in our own way, and probably even more so, we get in the way of the opportunity to be in that place and be in that space, whether it be management, HR professionals, administration, whoever that might be, because we go to work the very same way as we go home. We go to work, we work for what we do, we have our skill sets intact, we have our passions and purpose and everything like that, but we are uniquely different to such an extent. If we embrace our differences and embrace it to such a degree and say, hey, Brian's idea will win today, but it might be Hector's idea tomorrow that might even push us over the edge and get us to that next level. I believe that there's even a component of fluid leadership that we even need to have, that we can truly turn that corner from not only a culture perspective inside an organization, but even the culture perspective outside the very four walls of every organization out there. Because what you basically are doing, gentlemen, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you're transferring one culture that you're dictating into the culture of a workplace, and you basically are telling people you have to leave that culture at home. You can't bring it into the workplace. What say you, Hector?
So again, it's an interesting time in our country, because I think right now on the streets, this discussion of individual versus community goals is being hashed out, and that's going to carry over to the workplace. And so when you look at our companies, U.S.-based companies, and the focus of even our development plans and corporate goals, at some point, even 6 big corporate goals can get translated down to how that becomes my individual goals. And if we don't do a good job of explaining individual goals and how they directly tie and support community goals, it's all lost.
Yeah.
So that's the big shift right now. Okay, it's the need and the ability to actually focus on what's good for everybody. It's also good for you. Okay, but if we profess and support an organization that's more focused on individuality and individual success, that's kind of the problem that we're in. And so it's going to take some doing. There's some programs that I've seen that are very good at tying your effort and how it could support, or to what extent it supports the corporate goal. the community goal.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're going to hear phrases like community talked about quite a bit more. It takes a community to stand up to something that's inappropriate. It takes a community to stand up to a person that's behaving inappropriately. It takes a community to build something that's more successful. So kind of goes back to that first thing. It's a good time of discussion on all the differences and the different fractures. But we're going to have to start lining up more things where there's common goals and common themes and common needs, because we're going to have to get everybody pointing the same direction at some point.
Brian?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it delineates down to values. You know, what's important for you as an individual as well as an organization. And there's, I don't want to say it's prevailing belief, but there's a belief out there that our individual values will always supersede that of the greater good. And whether that goes all the way back to, survival, if I see saber-toothed tigers on the left, I'm going right. The flight and fight kind of survival mechanism that we have that's been ingrained for millions of years. And the notion of what values are for people is important because they're different for everyone. And people always have values. They just might not be in alignment with yours, mine, or anyone else's. And I think what the conversation ends up becoming, it isn't about the objectives that are laid out from a communal basis or even an organizational basis. Hector's been in probably more meetings with people in companies than you and me combined, Chris, and he could probably speak to this even better. But in my experience, when people are in a meeting in a business, whatever the objective is on the agenda, anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes into that meeting, the targets change. It's no longer about the objective. It's about Sally is right and Joe is right, and I need my point of view to be supported, and they're against me, and it's domination. So until we really start to recognize what we're addicted to as people in terms of looking good, sounding smart, all the preemptive kinds of ways of being that I want to be seen, until we recognize that gets in the way, I don't know how we can just move past it. And I think the denial of such stuff makes it that much worse. I mean, um, you know, you look at people, whether it be on social media or on the news, people are addicted to having the answer and giving the answer, as opposed to looking for the answer and finding it for themselves. We reach out, oh, I want to find an expert and a guru to tell me how to live my life, as opposed to, well, how can I live my life based on my own values? I don't necessarily have to live someone else's set of values in a way, but I think we collapse it and mistake it for one and the same. And it's kind of an interesting, like you said, we're very simplistic in many ways, yet very complicated in many ways. And we're searching for an answer that we already have in many ways, that it just ends up being this kind of constant hamster wheel that, oh, there it is again, and you see things perpetuate over time, and it just continues until we realize something different.
See, and that's what's so, disheartening, frustrated. My perspective, my professional perspective, is really on preventing violence, preventing people from hurting each other. But this is a perfect example. Our entire discussion has been about how to be a better person to other people. I quickly realized, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, that it's not about, warning signs. It's not about, some of the other pieces that's going to fix it. It's how we interact with each other. It's creating that culture that's going to change it.
Yes.
So when I hear people talk about, gates, guards, and guns, and there's a lot of professionals out there that talk about that, it doesn't change anything. I've yet to talk to a victim of crime that didn't know at some level that something was coming. Okay? So intuition, culture, how we interact with each other, our culture, our collective culture is what needs to shift. I don't need more gates and guards and guns. Now, I'm a consequence. When something goes wrong, when you have a group of 6 professionals at eBay that deteriorize and debase their value and other people's values to the point that they can justify taking that kind of action, that's really problematic, and that's where we get involved. But I would love to be out of work and be working on the front end. People do bad things.
Yeah.
We have to have that culture that's able to identify when somebody's doing something they're not supposed to, so we can intervene as early as possible. Right? If it was a rowboat, if we were sculling, I think it's what it's called. The sculling or crewing? Crewing. We're on the boats with if one person goes out of step, it's obvious to every other person. One person could not do their own thing because there's an obvious routine, an obvious pattern. It's the same way with a lot of this behavior. We have that common goal, and there could still be, a broad range of interpretation, but there's a common goal. We're pointing the same way. When somebody steps out of the bounds, it should stand out and make it much easier to say something.
Yes.
That's what having this collective culture allows us to do. The inappropriate behavior stands out even more. So that's, in my opinion, that's what we have to get back to really managing this culture and growing it.
Yeah, and when we stop rewarding certain behaviors as special, because if you look at other conflicts around the world, they maintain the conflict because it gives them a sense of purpose, that if that conflict was no longer there wouldn't be the same level of reason or purpose to do something. So, at some level, there's always going to be some faction around the world that is going to need or want that type of reality for themselves, because if they had peace, then their version of existence would no longer be as meaningful for them. And I think at some level, and I know this is slightly off topic, I think at some level that's really scary for people when they realize that their image or their created self-image might no longer be useful in whatever rewards that they were previously getting.
Yeah.
You see that in athletes all the time.
Yeah.
Imagine an athlete who, for their entire life, someone like Michael Jordan, and I'm not saying he is this way, but for his entire life, all he does is compete because he doesn't know how not to compete. And if you told him, hey, you can't compete anymore, I think that would probably do more internal damage to him than the fact that he can't play basketball anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's so tied.
Yeah, because that is one of the risk factors that we evaluate, is how much a person identifies with their job. And if we know that they're going to be losing that job in that process,
yes,
that changes the climate, and it makes it much more credible that something's going to happen. We don't predict violence. We try to evaluate whether or not the conditions exist that violence is likely to occur. And in that environment where they completely identify with their job, they have no family, they're very disgruntled, they collect injustices and they want to make it right, you very quickly start seeing all these things that line up that make you wonder, something's about to happen. It feels like something's about to happen.
Were the people at eBay, is there age in terms of similarities? Obviously, they were.
There's a range. There's a range. A retired police officer became the director of security. There's a range. It's really bizarre. Cultism. It's weird to get that many people playing along in such a vile game.
Unless there was something in it for them that was of value, whatever that is.
Yeah, there was some value. This couple had pinned some negative comments, that spoke out against some of their programs, as I understand it. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, they got federal attention for their efforts. That's a special project.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, like I said, when you shared that article, Hector, we got into a conversation on last week's call was about the toxic culture that's in workplaces today. And it just kind of made me think, if this is being led by executives, what's not to say that it wouldn't go to as far more further than what they took it. Someone can actually literally, let's say, show up at someone's house, say, okay, you really made me go off the deep end. I'm going to take a gun and then boom, boom, boom. It can even go to that route. Or maybe they might even take it to another thing. They'll say, hey, if I can do this to eBay customer, why can I not do this to someone who I don't like in my own organization? Oh, I can knock them off or whatever. And that's what went through my mind. I'm thinking, where does it stop? Where's the end result for these people?
Yeah, I think once you have a propensity towards something, then you do that. I do think it becomes easier to keep doing that. But it's an ideology that's then perverted.
Right.
They had some level of anger, frustration that translated into action. They started doing stuff. Their goal, their reward could have been, and I'm spitballing this, just the accolades of the team who could outdo each other. I think they started feeding off themselves. It doesn't look as much of a direct monetary benefit here to them.
No.
Okay? It's more reputation management, if you will, that they think they were trying to start. So it's not like direct compensation. It's highly unusual, but I think the team themselves were enabling. Now, you see much lower levels of this stuff happen every day, where a work team is in disagreement and two of them slight the other and don't invite the other person to lunch, don't include them in programs, take advantage of their work. So there's a lot of lower levels of things that could occur. And this is where I was talking about the woman who had her hair touched. If we have a culture that allows inappropriate behavior, doesn't call that out, doesn't self-correct, it's not surprising that you could have it occur. So I would make and harbor a guess that while this is the most profound issue that we know about at eBay or within this work team, there's a whole bunch of other leadership and management problems that they have going on, and that at least that part of the organization, beyond just 6 people getting together and doing something. I don't think it's an anomaly.
Yeah. Or they had some previous accounts or incidents like this somewhere else outside of eBay, right?
Yeah, and didn't manage it well. Something happened and it allowed it to fester.
Yeah.
And I have to go back to this, and I know we're kind of drifting into some many different places here, but I think it comes back down to our very humanity. The few bad actors, as they have been, especially on the eBay or in police or whatever, those few bad actors shouldn't really dictate the whole sum of who they are as a company or a whole and everything like that. We really need to truly weed out those bad apples that are doing those wrong things and take them for what they are and say, hey, you did this, you did that, you got to go. We can't tolerate this. But then in the same token, when we're calling for that change to be made and we're looking for those people positions of leadership to say, hey, this should be the end all be all to a certain degree, and say, hey, we got to change this because we have the president before us to say, hey, we shouldn't accept this. But then they don't do the very things that needs to change because we're stereotyping the whole as a whole when we're not really addressing the root cause. And I think once we address the root cause of it all, then those few bad actors are just that, the few bad actors, not the very whole organization or police force or security force or whoever that may be. We can't just paint them with a broad brush and those are those people right there. They're stupid idiots and they don't do nothing right at eBay or they don't do nothing right at Jet or whoever that might be. We're just already stereotypically just throwing that stuff out there and labeling them. And I believe labels unto itself is very bad for humanity because for me personally, I've been labeled because I have a learning disability, I had a speech impediment, I have an emotional disability, but I don't look at them as labels to me. I look at them as opportunities and things that really truly create the opportunities that's within me and what's presented for myself. So, gentlemen, what do you see about that? How can we truly weed out the bad apples?
So yeah, this is interesting because it comes up, and I hear people saying, "Well, not all cops are bad," in that context, and since it's a public debate right now, and I think there's a real problem in that statement. And here's the problem: whether it's eBay or any place else, I do think we are held to that one fraction that breaks. If this was a chain, as an example, and I had one bad link, when that link snaps, the whole thing comes apart. Okay? Brian, like you said, we're already connected as individuals. Mm-hmm. We already know who these people are. It's already a surprise. I guarantee there are people around these 6 eBay professionals that knew something was going wrong with them. So 5 other people knew that one person was doing something bad within that team. We have to support and encourage calling it out when it's broken. And it means we have to have an active program for looking at bad actors. I can't have a barrel of apples and not expect that, well, there'll be a few in the bad ones in the middle, because they'll rotten the entire thing out. I've got to have an active process for going to look for an apple that's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so I think that's the big difference. So if you want to translate it to law enforcement, all cops are honorable, they're noble, and if somebody steps out of line, we're going to step up and we're going to deal with it. The other way is saying not all cops are bad. I think it lets too many bad people off the hook. Does that make sense? We have to find and actively look for the elements that aren't working. The woman, just happened to be a woman, who was in the lobby at the PT clinic when she had her hair touched. If we hadn't conducted that training program, we would have never found out that she was going through this entire. Okay. We found through that process that there was a bad patient, there was a bad interaction. So my take is you have to have an active process for looking for things that are either not going the way they're supposed to, people not doing what they should be doing, or completely stepping out of line. And I just can't believe, coming back to eBay, how they manufactured a trip to go to these people's homes. And did they put an expense voucher and then their boss sign it? We have to have a process for identifying. Okay? So we know what to look for. I think we probably already know who they are. We just have to address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot of things that I think we know, and I that might be part of the issue. We know it is. We know the issue. We can spot the issue, as you said. We know a lot of things, but knowing doesn't do or solve or take action. Um, as you said in the TSA, say something. So when you see something, well, those are 2 different things. If I see something, one, I first then have to say something to whoever I have to, and then are they actually then going to do something with it? And I think in the workplace, there's a prevailing culture in some companies that even if I did say something, whether it be to HR or to my manager or my direct superior, that I'm going to be the one that's going to be ridiculed. I saw it in academics that if we legitimately questioned something, whether it be curriculum or an approach, we were looked at as don't rock the boat, just do your job, because we're not the ones making the decision. And it's a weird entity, especially in academics, because academics is, supposedly prides itself on being innovative and creative and so forth, but they're also going to be the first to tell you what creativity and innovation is. So I think it comes back to that environment that you mentioned, Hector, that in a workplace or in any other setting, one that is open and allows for people to share their differences or indifferences or so forth. But you see even other signs of this in the media or social media. How many reports have come out in the last 3 weeks about the stifling of certain viewpoints or monitoring tweets and allowing certain things or adjusting policies? And I'm not saying it should be one or the other in terms of what should or shouldn't be said, but if you want people to have an open dialogue and share information, you can't censor what people say, whether you agree with it or not. And I think a lot of people are so comfortable with being in an echo chamber and just being told that their opinion is right and you're smart. Look, you go back to how people are parented, right? Parents always say their kids can do no wrong. Who knows? But the point though is that if you really want an open dialogue, then allow for the dialogue, allow for disagreement, allow for it. But it seems like we're becoming less tolerant of that as a whole. That I want open dialogue as long as it's what I agree with, not what you agree with, so to speak. It's kind of an odd approach.
Yeah, and here's what I hope. I definitely see what you're talking about, and I think there's just extreme views on every side of an issue, and
Yep.
I don't have the passion to go online and argue with somebody. I've probably sat there and thought about responses to posts 100 times and just not post them because there's no value. We're not going to close that out. I think there's a lot more people who are much nearer center who just they want to get along. They'll allow for some differences. I think the problem is on whatever side of the issue, a lot of these people are just not compelled enough to come forward, and probably rightly so. There's probably no argument. I moderate a chat group with about 26,000 people, and just the bickering that goes back and forth is unbelievable. A post can go on for hours and nothing gets resolved. So I think finding that middle ground where we allow for differences of opinions. Doxing has become a really big deal. This cancel culture is huge right now.
Yes.
When we get done with that, then what? Right? How are we going to move forward? And so I think that's the challenge in your workplace. I think you're going to have some serious discussions about, one, what's the makeup of your organization? That's going to be different. People aren't going to agree. How are we going to at least get everybody pointing the same direction and acknowledge, okay, we're not going to agree on everything, but these 5 principles we're going to agree on. These 3 items are the things we do, and here's our one goal for today. And at least everybody's facing that same direction. And that's going to have to be repeated for us to get out of this problem in our homes, in our communities, because the loudest voice cannot win. And I think that's the problem right now. And we're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
It's like what John C. Maxwell says in the 21 Infallible Laws of Leadership. He says, let the best idea win. Just if you allow that to happen, like I said earlier, Brian's idea today might be the idea of the day that really is the thing that he's going to take to the department and say the department did very well for today because of what he did. But then tomorrow it might be you, Hector, that you did something that was so great and profound and said, damn, I'm going to leave my impact this way, and this is how I can contribute. And that's why I believe that when we have that intentional fortitude and that mindset and awareness that we're allowing that to happen to people who know what their purpose is, know their strengths, what are their greatest strengths in those weaknesses sometimes, that next thing you know, we are allowing them to make the critical decisions that help each other, number one. But then number two, we're allowing the process to play out because we know uniquely every department's going to be different, number one. But then number two, everyone is going to be different in that very department. Even though we have, let's say, a 5-pillar strategy that if we agree to those 5 pillars, well, those 5 pillars will be met, even on that one pillar of the, I call it maybe 1 pillar a day kind of strategy, that you just break it down even more so that everyone can say, hey, this is our goal today. Overall, bam, this is what we're going to do. Because, see, I think we've lost touch that the human brain can only attain the one goal a day. You can't just throw everything at it and just like it be like throwing mud on the wall and see if it's going to stick. Oh, that's my goal for today. And I'm everywhere, and I get nothing done. But like I said, if we had just allow that to happen and let us be human for who we truly are, then we can have those people in leadership be able to say, how can I help and serve you? How can I get your department to where it needs to go? Or even help you, Brian, or help you, Hector, to really get you to where you need to go. And that comes back to what my core mission statement of my life is, and the mission statement of the organization that I'm building is that if I help you, you help me, then we help we. Because if we're truly going to be in this together, we can really sit down at the table of humanity and really have those great and engaging conversations that's going to get us to that next level of humanity. Or I even dare say the next rise and renaissance of humanity, because we can become so much better than what we were yesterday. It's all process of evolution, understanding, awareness. And we get, like I said, sometimes the worst enemy is our own worst enemy is ourselves. We get in our own way every day. And if we can stop that, gentlemen, I guarantee you, not only will our homes will be more understood, to where parents and kids truly see eye to eye one another, and then when those very parents and kids and aunts and uncles and fiancés and whoever that else may be, when they go to work, they feel that they truly belong to something that's much larger than themselves. And we want to become a part of something bigger than of ourselves. I think that's an innate inequality in our evolution, but we really don't see that awareness. So I want to leave it on that note, gentlemen, and get your take from that, and then we'll call it a day, because I believe that's the way we need to move forward. So, Hector, I'll turn it to you, sir, and I want to hear your thoughts.
No, I think you hit it right, the nail right on the head, and I'll leave it with this: my field, my work, my passion, really has become the consequence of not doing everything we just talked about. It's unfortunate. I take a negative and I turn it into a positive, but the reality is the vast majority of times when I come in, something's broken. Somebody's been hurt. Somebody's trying to hurt somebody, or lives have been lost. And so unless and until we start getting back to treating each other like human beings, until we get back to kind of focusing on that collective goal, myself and a couple thousand other practitioners that do what I do are going to continue to be very, very busy. And so I think that's why these discussions are so important.
Brian, what say you?
Yeah, Chris, it's interesting. I think the human species might be the only species on the face of the earth that can get in its own way, in its own life and its own relationships. I mean, it's funny if you look at fish. Imagine a fish waking up on Monday morning and saying, "I don't want to go swimming today." It doesn't know any better. It is to water what a fish is. It just swims. I think people are just that way with interference. It doesn't have any other. We have no other recourse. I mean, the mind just does what it does. The mind searches out for what the most important and interesting, fascinating thing is, and that's what it latches onto. The 70 odd percent of thoughts that come into our mind every day are negative. It's how it's designed. And until you realize that maybe you can to separate from it, and become separate from your ideas and thoughts, that you can free yourself. But yeah, it's getting to a conversation is important, and I think listening to other people is the real crux of it. Allowing for people to challenge your beliefs in the world and not freaking out over it. I've talked to you about this before, Chris. It's one of the reasons why I practice detachment. I'm fully committed to do something and fully intentional to do something, but frankly, I don't care if it occurs or it doesn't. It either will or it won't. I'm committed to doing it, but I'm not going to get freaked out over whether it does or it doesn't. And I think we live in this world that if I don't get certain things done, then all of a sudden I'm a failure. In the workplace is very much that way. Results, performance. But that's another conversation. So,
Yeah, that's definitely another conversation to be had.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, I greatly appreciate you so much, and it's just been a godsend to have you guys in my life, and I've learned so much from you guys in a very unique way, and I just truly believe that that it's really needed now more than ever before. Our